You said that you interviewed lots of people. Are there particular stories that stood out for you?
So many. I think that thinking back just recent stories that were super inspiring, one of the first members of Congress to take paternity leave, his kind of district manager, basically the guy had a kid, Seth Moulton, and like didn't take any time off. They had a second kid and their whole staff was like, you need to take paternity leave. Like we're forcing you to. And then he kind of returned that favor to his district director, kind of like chief operating officer kind of figure who had been working for 20 years and never really had a break, kind of in public service. And the guy's name is Rick. He's got two kids, ages 11 and 13. And they just kind of like traversed the country in an RV, went to like a dozen national parks. And he talked about how they were walking, like descending down into the Grand Canyon. And there was this plaque that said like, I think it's every 10 feet you descend is 1,000,000 years of geologic time. And so his kids always asking questions like, what's this? What's that? What's that? Like they kind of had this like family existential crisis about like, does this mean we're just like a layer of dust in the world? Like, what does that mean? And like, why are we so frustrated about like how hot it is? And he kind of came back from that trip realizing that he loved nature and he'd been away from it for 20 years. Like all of his kind of geography had been based around what he did for work. And he grew up as a rafting guide in Oregon on the Rogue River. And so he went back to the Rogue River. He did a rafting trip with his family and like his friends that he grew up with, where he was like river guides with, and it just gave him this like connection to his inner self and inner child. And the fact that he got to like take his kids there and his kids got to see him in like an atmosphere that was super important and core to his identity, all these things, he was just like, this was nothing short of extraordinary. And it was like a once in a lifetime trip. And also like, does this have to be a once in a lifetime trip? And so it kind of opened up all these doors inside of him, which is I would like to continue doing something I find meaningful. I would also like to prioritize and execute some of these trips that are really meaningful to me. And like I got to know my family like so much better in a way that had they not done that, he doesn't know if he'd know his kids or his wife kind of as well as he does now. So I hear stories like that once a week and they're incredible.
So it sounds like sabbatical is so much more than just I'm burnt out, I need a rest. It's about getting in touch and finding out who you actually are.
Yeah. Who you are, who you were that you want to like re-energize, what you're curious about that maybe like you haven't had time to explore. It's just about space. You hear these terms that people describe their sabbatical and describe themselves as like, I felt more human or I had like space and perspective. And no one's going to like go on sabbatical because you get more space or like perspective. It's not sexy enough. But like when you have it, you're like, oh man, a way of describing it here often is it feels like you're bringing like future learnings forward in your life. I'm sure I would have figured this out about myself, but it would have taken 10 more years because I'm so busy with work and family and life. Now I had this time to experiment on this thing. And I realized that I want to leave the work I'm doing and start this thing I've always wanted to. Or I want to continue doing what I'm doing, but make sure I'm taking extended a couple weeks off with my family every year and being outdoors. So it's kind of like a time machine. Like you're kind of getting to see your future self and like invest more in that now. And like, who knows how your life could be different with those changes.
So the discovering yourself, the inner journey is actually covered in your cohort, which we'll talk about later. And I noticed that under number 4, which is your inner journey, you said test your assumptions with others. What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've found, I've been doing cohorts for about a year, a little over a year. And it's just people that come to me saying, hey, you're the expert in sabbaticals. Like, what should I do? Like, how should I be thinking about it? What should I avoid? And I think that one of the things that happens for most people on sabbaticals, most people, they wait until something bad happens and they go on sabbatical. And so they require a fair amount of healing. A lot of folks take it by themselves, right? They have like a breakup or they're single and like that's kind of the easiest time to take time off. It can be very lonely. Even if you're on it with a partner or with family or friends, like you're on this like very scary journey where you're off the beaten path that most are taking. And you're doing something that's like very scary and like personal and unknown, and you don't know what the future holds, and that's intimidating. And so what we found is that just the activity of bringing people together who are all on like very different journeys, but they're kind of the same, is helpful for folks. It's very fulfilling and kind of self-affirming to say like, oh man, like you're worried about this too. So am I. It's like, oh, you had this happen too. So did I. So I think there's like a benefit to being in community with folks that are going through similar things, even if you're like very different life stages or have very different plans, that it's just hard to realize that you're not the only person in the world suffering on your own journey when you're doing it by yourself.
I imagine this is a common question for you, but Has anyone regretted taking a sabbatical?
Okay, so I've been looking for someone who is like, listen, I want my refund. I would not have taken that sabbatical. And part of the reason I haven't found one is that we're kind of self justification machines, right? Like everything you do, you end up justifying, you end up finding meaning in it anyway. And so, like, very rarely, I think, do we like truly regret and not find meaning in our actions. I found people who had pretty bad things happen to them on sabbatical, people who got divorced on sabbatical, people whose relationships kind of like took a turn for the worse, people who spent their whole sabbatical like caring for like an ailing or dying loved one. But all of those people were like, listen, this was not how I wanted it to be, but I'm glad I got to be there for that person. Or I'm glad I learned that I shouldn't have been with my partner. Man, that would have been a mistake if we had kids. Right. And so I think the folks who took a sabbatical during the pandemic had probably the hardest time of all the folks I've talked to. You couldn't travel as much, if at all. It was really hard to meet people. So like made the lonely process even lonelier. And it's just really hard to like learn and grow and be inspired and see new things, right? Like the world was on fire. So probably if I went back and interviewed a lot of those folks, that was how they would view it. But like they were also leaving jobs where they were miserable. Like it was the pandemic, so it wasn't everybody miserable. So it's just tough. Like I don't know if those folks would regret it as much as they would regret that that was the time that it happened.
And you said before that sabbaticals also helps to fight FOMO. Why is that?
I think part of FOMO is feeling like other people are doing stuff that you can't do or you haven't done. I think of a sabbatical a little bit as regret insurance. You will never have a regret that you didn't go hike in the Himalayas because like you did it, right? Like you'll never regret that you didn't see what it would be like to live in a Buddhist monastery for a month and because you did it and it was actually miserable. You never regret. So I think you still probably can have some FOMO around sabbatical. Like, am I missing out on just the routine and the good stuff back home? And like, do people think I'm weird? But I think the far majority of the feeling is that folks are like really feeling FOMO that they're not doing the same thing you're doing.
I mean, like now restrictions are lifting, you can start to actually travel, meet people. For those who are planning a sabbatical, how do you think about and structure it?
My advice on this is halfway between don't worry about it. Like, you can't have a bad sabbatical. And like, here's a structure that I think works. So, I mean, I want to encourage folks not to stress out about over planning or not getting it right, because I think part of the journey for most people is that experience of not knowing what you're doing and not having a plan and like seeing how that feels, kind of like being observant of like, I was just talking to a sabbatical coach today, Alice Chen. Part of her sabbatical story was she knew that she was super type A and had to have everything planned and organized and scheduled. So as part of her like provocations for herself and challenges was to not plan more than 2 days ahead. She like didn't know where she was going, didn't know where she was staying, and she had to like talk to folks and figure out what she was doing and get recommendations. And that was really good for her. So anyway, with all that preamble, what I would say is that you have to give yourself enough time to kind of like heal and like get the toxins out, right? So I would really suggest for folks like in the first phase, get into your body and out of your head. Do something with your hands, whether it's pottery or yoga or surfing or like whatever, and into your body. So you're just unable to like dwell and ruminate on the life you've kind of put on pause. Then the second kind of portion, you want to like explore. You want to try to answer questions that you've always had. You want to try to work towards your curiosities. You want to change plans. You want to spend time with like family and friends, invest in relationships, all that good stuff. And then be sure to make some time for like reintegration before you go back to regular life. So the majority of people aren't going to have like a sabbatical policy. They probably won't be going back to their jobs. But if you are, definitely make sure you have like a week or two to kind of like synthesize your learnings and get back onto like the regular pace of life. And if you're not, make sure that you have set really strong boundaries so that you're not looking for work and thinking about work during phase 2. And instead you like set it up so that like phase 3, like that's when you start thinking about it. So yeah, that's the grand overview.
And how do you design that system? You will talk about in depth, of course, in your cohort. How do you design that system to capture those learnings?
Most people look at it and they are kind of terrified about it and they don't know what to do. And they want to have like a little bit of guidance. Some people just need like a little bit of a nudge. In the class, we try to give people a bunch of frameworks and be like, hey, listen, here's a framework to think about using user research to figure out what you want to do and how you plan, how you answer questions, and then how you kind of like synthesize and then how you go out and like answer questions again. But here's a framework to think about it as the hero's journey of like going out and exploring and like coming back with the learnings. Whatever works for you, great. But once you have like a container and kind of like a structure for which you can think about it, I think it takes a little bit of the fear out of it to say, oh man, in phase 1, like I'm probably going to feel pretty bad. because I'm going to be stressed out about like leaving work and wondering what I should do next and like maybe worried about finances. And if you can instead say to folks, hey, you've already thought about like budget and finances, like don't worry about that. You already know that you're not allowed to think about what you're doing next until like this time. It's like set the calendar reminder, you know it's going to happen. So I just think it gives people like a little bit of confidence that they have like a guide kind of helping them along the way who's done it before.
What are the ideas that or places they can go to find inspiration for things they can do during the sabbatical?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of one of the things we want to do with the Sabbatical Project is continue to like tell more and more of these stories. Folks can say like, oh, I'm looking to have a spiritual sabbatical, or I'm looking to be surrounded by entrepreneurs. And so that's like, hopefully like a glossary that we're going to continue to build up on. That's what I found when starting the research is that people will write a blog post or a Medium post about it, and then they'll kind of move on. And then so there's just 10,000 posts about how incredible this experience was, but no like home base.
So that's what the sabbatical project is going to be. I guess there are quite a few really interesting stories and some that are coming as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You'll stay tuned over the next year, both like interviews and stories. And the idea again is that folks can find their kind of example and find their inspiration there.
There's a stat going around that 17% of US companies are now offering sabbatical leave. I wonder what's behind that trend of companies being increasingly open to this.
I mean, you think you see it now with the Great Resignation, where companies, I think, for a while tried to trick people and say like, "Hey, you get unlimited vacation and you get ping pong tables and like free pizza for dinner." And I think folks have finally realized that that was a boondoggle. It was just a way to get you to work more and not think about not working. So I think people seem to have more and more power about how companies work. People, especially talented people, have power, swaying like benefits and recruiting practices and stuff like that. And so I think sabbaticals is something that folks are seeing now with, can it help you make a sustainable life out of work? So hopefully we'll see more and more companies offering it and hopefully more companies measuring it to see like, how long should it be? Like, does it need to be full benefits or like some sort of partial? Like, what are things that are important to folks? How can you increase creativity? How can you increase the tenure at companies and like all those kind of levers that companies care about?
And you've spoken and interviewed CEOs before who've established sabbatical policies in their own companies. What are your main takeaways from those conversations?
The first is that everyone has the same fear. You want to do the right thing, but you also don't want to spend a bunch of money on launching a policy if like your employees are just going to leave, right? So like, will they leave? Am I just giving them a golden parachute so they can leave sooner? And I think that some CEOs really get it. And coincidentally or not, like those CEOs are folks who have taken sabbaticals, right? So they understand that life is about more than work and that if someone is meant to leave, then they probably were going to leave anyway, and they were probably doing pretty bad work. If someone's going to take a month off and then leave, how good a work do you think they were doing? Do you think they just started thinking about leaving, or do you think they were thinking about it for a long time? And I think some of the best leaders are thinking, oh, I think about this example from the African Leadership Academy. Their kind of co-founder left, and when he came back, he was like, man, like all of these things that I normally did went fine without me. And like, I never could take my hand off the steering wheel enough to see that my people actually like could do as good, if not better, a job at these things than I did. And like, oh, this thing over here went horribly. Clearly, like I am the only person that does this and I haven't empowered other folks to do it. And like, I wouldn't have known that had I not stepped back for a bit anyway. So I can kind of tell what kind of mindset the leader has when I talk to them about this. Are they thinking medium to long term? Are they thinking about empowering and growing their kind of employees to step up to challenges? Are they thinking about preparing their company for key personnel risk and like emergencies? Or are they like just worried about how bad it would look if people left, how much their sales would drop if their salesperson was out for 3 months or something? And this is the thing I talk to folks who are looking for jobs after sabbatical. It's like, will someone hold it against you that you took time off? I don't know. If they do, is that a company you want to work for? Like if you're saying, oh, I had the courage to take a few months off and do something that's really important to me that I've always wanted to do. If someone is not supportive of that, I think that's kind of a red flag.
What are your thoughts of forced sabbaticals? Like you gave that example earlier, you must take your paternity leave. Should employers force people to take sabbaticals if the employees refuse to do so? Because I'm thinking of your well-being, you should do it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ideas I've been playing with is this idea of a pre-sabbatical. So like all of these companies, like everyone, 20 million people, I think have quit in the past 4 months in the US. If you quit and you were burnt out and then you like start a job right away afterwards, there's a 0% chance that you're not bringing that kind of burnout and malaise to your next job. And so I think it's actually benefits companies to say like, hey, we know that you are like worried about money. We know you're worried about how it looks in the job market. Like it's okay. Take a month. We'll pay for your benefits, maybe like advance you some of your salary. We would rather have you come rested and restored than just be totally frazzled and all that stuff. I would love to see companies experiment with that and see how like the performance of those employees entering the workforce compares.
Are there any companies already doing this?
Not that I've heard of. I think there's probably a lot of like ad hoc, a lot of people negotiate start dates with their companies. And this happens with consulting firms a lot where you can delay your start date. So it kind of like helps the firm like smooth the number of like new hires and things like that. But I mean, I owned a business. I get it. Like when you need to hire someone, you need to hire someone. It's not like you can wait another 6 months. So I get that there are real world consequences for business owners, but I think the benefits could potentially way outweigh the downsides.
When should people think about taking a sabbatical? I mean, I imagine it is preferably way before I actually start burning out. So is it something we should be intentional about and just think, I've worked for 5 years, let's take a sabbatical, like Stephen said?
Yeah. I think the best case scenario is that you kind of have in your mind like every 5 years or 6 years or something, 7 years, 10 years, I'm going to take time off. And that way you kind of like plan for it, you budget for it, right? I mean, when I talk about sabbaticals, it's not like I think that everyone can take a sabbatical tomorrow, but I think there's very few people who couldn't save up for 10 years to take a few months off, right? And so like think about what would make sense financially and life stage wise, like especially get your kids to a certain age and whatnot and then see how it goes. I think that there's going to be times where you can't plan for that makes sense to have a sabbatical, like your company goes public or you get fired or there's a death in the family. And so like that's always going to happen. But I think folks should be intentional about it and say, oh, when we get married, I want to take an extended honeymoon. Or when our kids are 7 and 10, we want to be abroad for 6 months or live abroad for a year. Or like before, after I go to grad school, take a few months to recover. Life kind of gets away from you and like you focus on the urgent instead of the important.
And for those who do want to go on a sabbatical, have you found a way which is the most effective in asking for that extended period from an employer?
One thing that I've heard time and time again is your employers can't read your mind. And more often than not, when you bring it up, it's possible, right? So people can use unpaid leave policies if they have it, or you can work with your boss to be like, hey, listen, I'm working on the launch of this thing, but like once it launches, like that could be a good time to take off. And there's always kind of natural cycles that you can pre-plan for that I think work. And the other thing is that if you ask for it and other people ask for it and you ask around and you tend to find that other people have taken it, you can actually be the agent of change to get a policy launched in your company. No one can read your mind. They don't know if you want a sabbatical policy. And so I think it's scary, but bringing it up and saying like, this is not a thing that I need right now, but I'd love to be able to do this at some point in my life is totally reasonable. Like the employers want to keep good employees. And if they can keep you for another year or two, but they have to lose you for 3 months, I think the trade-off is totally clear.
And we're speaking in end of 2021. I wonder how much, if any, that COVID has impacted on people wanting to take sabbaticals.
I would like to think that behind this great resignation is this understanding that people have all kind of collectively gone through something that reminded them how precious life is, right? Like you're not guaranteed to be around next year. It's also put the magnifying glass on work and life and how close and integrated everything was. And so I think it's made people realize like, oh man, this is what I do for a living, like every day. This is intense. For those fortunate enough to have their jobs and to have flexibility for location, it's given folks a little bit of a sneak peek of like, oh, I can live in a place that's more aligned with my values. I can have a little bit more time off and time to myself or time in nature. So I think it's blown open the door for possibilities for a lot of folks. It's sent employers kind of like scrambling because they don't feel like they can make all of the rules. And similar to our sabbatical research, where like the majority of sabbaticals happen based on a negative event. They're catalyzed by something negative because people just don't have it in their programming to think about taking time off just for themselves. They wait until it's too late. They wait until they've burnt out. They wait until something bad has happened that like snaps them out of their kind of routine.
Is there any other surprising learnings from your research that we haven't talked about yet?
I mean, on that point, I was just talking, we uncovered this kind of state that we call functional workaholism. So until you are removed from work, you don't realize the kind of negative, vicious cycle that you're in with work. That's just something that folks like have to be kind of out of it to realize. We talked about how most sabbaticals are catalyzed by negative events. I think that, listen, it is really difficult to manage to take time off if you have kids or a family. But some of the most inspiring stories come from those folks. It's either kids whose parents like took sabbaticals or were academics when they were kids and they got to like live in a foreign country and it changed their mindset for the rest of their life. Or it's parents who say like, I've seen my kids as basically like a bundle of responsibilities, like get them here for that. And they all of a sudden get to see them and their personalities bloom in a way that they just don't think would have happened otherwise. So I would just encourage folks to like think about it from like a longer 5 to 10 year horizon, not like oh, this guy doesn't understand my life. I can't take time off next summer. Like I'm busy, like everyone is.
And what are you working on that we can support you in?
These cohort courses, we have one that's starting next week. I think folks just get involved in the Sabbatical Project. If you have a story about your own sabbatical, share it. If you work at a company and you can launch a policy, we want to do it and help you study it. If you're coming to take a sabbatical, join the Facebook group, follow us on LinkedIn. We're trying to start a movement and we're trying to normalize this. So we need all the help we can get.
Is there any big idea you've changed your mind on recently?
I mean, I don't want to be like spitting rainbows and sunshine about sabbaticals all the time. I do think that it was really tough. Like the pandemic was tough. And I think taking a sabbatical was really tough. I think that if you take away the ability to heal and to like see new things and meet people, like a sabbatical can be really tough and could be like a prison sentence, right? I have more empathy for folks that have had like really tough times and tried to take off during COVID and kind of had bad timing. I know that you're probably asking more generally, but since we're talking sabbaticals, it's in my mind.
So it sounds like sabbatical is something of a privilege, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's a privilege in many ways. Like one is, I was like financial. If you're in a world where you're supported by your employer and they pay for you and like they give you benefits, then there's no reason you can't take a sabbatical. We're very far away from that being the main avenue for sabbaticals. But people in our research who had that of all socioeconomic levels, it's not like they didn't get benefits from it. It's just that folks are less likely to be able to do that until employers or government policy allows. But just the other nature of the privilege, I think, is personality and kind of psychological privilege. Like, do you even think that you can take off? Right. I know plenty of folks that have more money than the majority of the world who don't believe that they can take a few months off. That's crazy. Right. And so I think there's some folks who are like, yeah, I'm going to dig into my savings, but this is an investment in my future. And like what is life for? Right. And so I think there's like this psychological privilege too, that culturally or the stories that people hear kind of help them get that mindset, but it's not guaranteed.
Just to tap into the answer earlier, is there actually any cons to taking sabbatical outside the context of COVID?
I think that we're still in this inflection point of there's a lot of studies on like work devotion norms and how people perceive folks that have taken time off. And like if you're in a law firm and you take time off or you have a kid or something, does that change people's perspective of your commitment? So I think there are like pockets and niches where if you take time off, the folks that you care about in your industry are going to look down on you, right? I think that's becoming more and more rare, but that exists. And so the question is, and this is what I said earlier, is like, if that's how you're going to be seen and interpreted in those environments, like, okay, that's your life. And so like, what other consequences does that have if people are going to look down on you for taking time to be with your family or whatnot? So yeah, I think there's real consequences. Obviously, like you don't make money typically during a sabbatical. I know of plenty of stories where you go and when you apply for a new job, when you get back, you make way more than you made when you left. And so your sabbatical essentially pays for itself. But those are like the predominant amount of stories are really positive. And so it's hard not to tell those stories.
Well, thank you so much, DJ, for your time. I normally end all my interviews with these questions. So the first one is this: do you feel like you have found your why?
I think that that's a process. So Elizabeth Gilbert talks about following your curiosity. There's a quote that I like, which is about kind of living the question. So instead of answering the question and like needing to find answers, it's being like, are you following this curiosity? Are you following this question that you're excited about? And I definitely am doing that. I think that for right now, I am really passionate about this question. I think it can add a lot of value to a lot of people's lives. And so, yes, I am for now. And we'll see where it goes and how long it lasts.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
I think that what we're doing here is more than long vacations. People who go on sabbatical emerge wanting to do, more things with their family. They emerge more pro-social. So like caring about their loved ones, friends, like other people in the community. Some of the most inspiring ideas I've heard of like starting an electric airplane company or starting a company that encourages people to be vegetarian. Those ideas are hatched on sabbaticals because you're getting this perspective of like your whole life. What's your life's work? What's important in the world? So I hope that I can change the way that we think about work and time off and life and living and meaning through encouraging people to kind of go on their own journeys and take sabbaticals. That's one of the things I like to be remembered for.
And what do you think are the most important qualities of a successful person?
When I think back at the times when I consider myself to be the most successful, it is times when the things that I've accomplished have had like a multiplier effect. So it's not just like me making more money or achieving this thing. It's like by virtue of achieving something, I like inspired people and then they went off to do other things. And I look at their successes and I say like, I feel like I was a big part of those and that I like maybe catalyzed and played a role in them. And so like my success has like blossomed a bunch of successes. I also think from like a sabbatical perspective, I feel like when folks can take extended leave and like look around and be able to say like, nothing really needs major work here. I enjoyed this time off. I'm going to make like a few tweaks. I want to take another block of time off, but like I'm pretty happy with the dials of like family and work and meaning and things like that. That's something I definitely aspire to. I think that's like a successful person.
And where can people go to connect with you and find out what you're doing, sign up for your cohort?
The name isn't the catchiest, but the Sabbatical Project, I think it's kind of everywhere. So LinkedIn, sign up for our newsletter, the website, thesabbaticalproject.org. Yeah, follow us and keep in touch. And really like this is supposed to be a movement. So like ask questions, help others that are on sabbatical. If you're an alum, tell us your story, try to get your company to launch a policy or to study it. This is not just about us kind of like giving you the rules, the testaments of sabbaticals. So yeah, appreciate you asking all these questions and sharing your gift as well. So thank you.